The radio clicked once in my ear, then settled into dead air. I was kneeling behind a low mud wall outside a farming village in eastern Afghanistan, rifle angled down, eyes locked on a narrow access road that cut through dust and broken asphalt. One patch of that road stood out immediately, darker than the rest. Smoother, like it had been patched yesterday and left to dry in a hurry. The order came through clean and flat. 2-6, you are green en route. Advance and clear the crossing. Over. I did not move. Behind me, my team went still. No gear shifting, no breathing loud enough to hear. The sweat under my body armor turned cold against my spine. Somewhere ahead, a single bird lifted off, wings snapping once, then the village went quiet in a way I had learned to distrust. I keyed the mic, 2-6 holding. Stand by. Over. The reply came back immediately, stripped of tone. Negative, 2-6. Push now. Over. I stared at that dark patch in the road. My mouth tasted like copper. I tried to picture my lead boot coming down on it. Tried to picture what would happen next. My hands stayed locked where they were. Seconds dragged. Then more. Command broke the silence again, slower this time. 2-6, interrogative. Reason for halt. Over. That was the moment I knew this was no longer about movement. It was about whether I trusted procedure more than what I was seeing. Subscribe to my channel, Lady Veteran Stories, for more real military stories, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I was a staff sergeant then, deployed in the year 2012 to eastern Afghanistan, operating out of a small forward operating base tucked between farmland and low hills that all looked the same after a while. Most people imagine deployments as constant firefights and explosions. The truth is, most days are routine layered on top of tension. Long patrols, repeated routes, familiar roads that start to feel safe simply because you have driven them before. I had been in the Army a little over 11 years by then. Infantry from the beginning. This was my second deployment to Afghanistan. I trusted orders. I believed in the system. I was not known for hesitation or freelancing. If anything, I was the one reminding younger leaders to stick to the plan and keep things clean. Discipline keeps people alive. That was the lesson drilled into me early, and it had held up more often than not. Our mission rotation that week was route security and presence patrols. We were responsible for keeping a key access road open between several villages and a nearby logistics hub. The road was nothing special. Cracked asphalt laid years earlier, patched and repatched by locals. Culverts ran underneath it at uneven intervals, most of them dry, all of them potential problems. IEDs were not new to us. They were part of the landscape. You learned to look without staring, to notice changes without convincing yourself you were seeing ghosts. That morning started like dozens before it. A rushed brief in a plywood shack. A map taped to the wall with grease pencil marks from previous days still faintly visible. Intel said there had been chatter in the area, nothing actionable. No names, no timing. Just enough to justify extra eyes on the road. We had heard versions of that briefing before. We rolled out mid-morning. The sun was already high, baking the dust into the road and flattening shadows. Civilians were sparse, which was not unusual, but it was quieter than I liked. No kids running alongside the road. No motorcycles passing us close just to see who we were. The villages watched from a distance, doors open, windows dark. As we approached the crossing, I noticed the first thing that did not fit. One section of asphalt looked newer than the rest. Not repaired properly, just darker. Slightly smoother. Like someone had rushed the job and hoped no one would notice. I slowed my pace without meaning to. That patch stayed in my peripheral vision longer than it should have. I started cataloging small details the way experience teaches you to. Tire tracks that ended too abruptly. A length of wire half buried near the shoulder that might have been trash and might not. A culvert opening partially blocked by loose dirt that had not been there the day before. None of it was enough to stop a patrol on its own. Together, it formed a pattern I did not like. Command came over the radio checking our status. Everything sounded routine from their end. Timelines, distances, green lights, and confirmations. From above, the route was just a line on a screen. From where I was kneeling, it felt like a question that had not been answered yet. I thought about the men behind me, about how many times we'd walked roads like this and nothing had happened, about how easy it would be to tell myself I was overthinking it. Fatigue does that. So does repetition. You start to assume tomorrow will look like yesterday. Then I noticed the silence. Not dramatic silence, just absence. No wind moving the grass near the culvert. No distant engine noise. Even the insects had gone quiet. It reminded me of another road, another year, where the same stillness had settled right before everything went wrong. The order to advance came through clean and procedural. No urgency in the voice. No warning either, just forward motion expected as normal. On paper, it made sense. From where I was, it did not. I realized then that the situation was moving faster than the information. That happens more than people admit. Decisions get made because schedules demand them, not because the picture is complete. Most of the time, it works out. Sometimes, it does not. I looked again at that dark patch of road. The culvert beneath it. The way the dirt around the edges looked slightly disturbed, like it had been tamped down by hand. I felt the weight of the decision settle in my stomach, heavy and unmoving. That was the moment where the day stopped being routine. That was the moment where whatever I did next would matter, whether anything happened or not. We took our positions without a word. The team spread out the way we had rehearsed until it lived in muscle memory, spacing correct. Angles covered. No one rushed to be first and no one lagged behind. There were no jokes, no comments over the internal net. That alone told me I was not the only one seeing it. When seasoned soldiers go quiet on their own, it means something does not sit right. Radio traffic from higher stayed clipped and procedural. Status checks, distance confirmations. No wasted words. From their end, the route was still just a task to be completed. 2-6, report position. Over. I answered, keeping it clean. 2-6 at crossing. Holding. Over. There was a pause, then the reply. Solid copy. Solid copy. Continue movement. Over. I kept my eyes on the road. Heat shimmered above the asphalt, but that darker patch stayed sharp, refusing to blur the way the rest of the surface did. The dust around it was wrong. The wind was pushing from the south, but the grit near the culvert leaned against it as if it had been disturbed and settled in a hurry. I tracked the edge of the road with my eyes and caught a brief flash near the tree line, something reflective. It vanished as soon as I focused on it. Probably nothing. Probably everything. Behind me, a younger soldier shifted his stance. Gravel cracked under his boot, loud in the stillness. My hand came up instantly. He froze, weight half transferred, eyes on me. Sweat ran down the side of my neck and collected under my collar, cooling fast despite the heat. I keyed the mic again. 2-6 requests. Clarification on crossing. Over. The answer came back sharp, but still mechanical. Negative. Crossing is green. Push. Over. Intel was thin. That was not unusual. What made it dangerous was the timing. Thin intel paired with momentum is how units walk into problems that could have been avoided. I had seen it before, years earlier, on a road that looked just as ordinary until it was not. Different province. Same lesson. Command came back again, tighter this time. 2-6, interrogative, why halt? Over. I chose my words carefully. Assessing anomaly at crossing. Stand by. Over. That bought me seconds. Not minutes. Seconds. I could feel the pressure building through the radio even without anyone raising their voice. The system does not need emotion to be intimidating. It just keeps moving. Those seconds felt heavier than firefights I had been in. Gunfire gives you clarity. You react because you have to. Silence leaves room for doubt. It tempts you to move just to break it, to do something so the waiting stops. A civilian vehicle appeared in the distance then. A beat-up pickup truck, tan and dust-coated, cresting the low-rise half a mile out. It was coming straight toward the crossing, slow but steady. If we did not move, it would. And if it hit that patch of road before we figured out what we were dealing with, the consequences would not be ours alone. My mouth went dry. I glanced at the truck, then back to the culvert, then to the dark asphalt that refused to look like the rest of the road. The clock was no longer theoretical. It was rolling toward us on 4 worn tires. Command came back on the net. 2-6, push and clear. Over. I did not answer right away. That hesitation was not confusion. It was calculation. And I knew that whatever I said next would decide how this day ended. The pressure increased the moment I did not answer. Not shouted. Not emotional. Just tighter, more frequent transmissions, like a metronome speeding up. 2-6, confirm movement. Over. I reminded myself of the men behind me, their spacing, their trust, their families who had no idea where they were standing at that exact moment. We started picking up sounds again. Faint. Intermittent. Not voices. The soft scrape of metal, followed by a brief pause, then another. It was coming from beyond the culvert, just far enough back to be hidden by the rise and the trees. Too deliberate to be animals rooting around, too controlled to be accidental. Whoever was there knew how to stay quiet. The pickup truck kept coming. Closer now. I could see the cracked windshield, the bed loaded with empty crates. A civilian, no armor, no radio. Just a man driving the same road he probably drove every day, unaware of the choice forming in front of him. I keyed the mic. 2-6 requests aerial or engineer confirmation. Over. The reply came back immediately. Negative. Assets unavailable. Continue movement. Over. I asked for a delay. The answer did not change. Negative. Execute. Over. The order came again, stripped of all context. Advance. Over. I stared at the road and forced myself to imagine the sequence, if I complied. 1 step forward. Weight transfers. Pressure plate closes. There is no warning, no time to react. Just heat, force, and silence where voices had been. I could already see who would be closest. Who would be caught by the blast. That was not imagination. That was experience filling in the gaps. The pickup truck was less than a quarter mile out now. If I stayed in cover, he would drive straight into the crossing. If I stepped out to stop him, I would break cover and put myself on that patch of road. The clock was real now, physical. Loud in my head. I made my decision. 2-6 holding position. Over. The radio went silent for a beat that felt longer than it was. In that pause, I understood exactly what I had just done. I had chosen to stop the system instead of flowing with it. That is not something the Army teaches you to do lightly. The response came back colder than anything before it. 2-6, confirm you are unable to comply. Over. I answered without raising my voice. Affirmative, holding. Over. No argument. No explanation. Just the truth. Outwardly, nothing changed. We were still kneeling in the dust. The road still looked ordinary. The pickup kept rolling closer. But internally, everything had shifted. I had crossed a line I had never crossed before. Not in combat, not in training, not in my career. I was no longer waiting for permission. I was waiting to see if I was right. I started issuing instructions without changing my position. Short, quiet, all hand signals and low voices. Adjust sectors. Eyes on the tree line. One shooter on the culvert. One on the road. Nobody steps forward unless I say so. Nobody breaks cover. The team responded immediately, shifting by inches, not feet, rifles tracking smoothly. They trusted the intent, even if they did not fully know the reason yet. Command came back on the net, sharper now. 2-6. State reason for noncompliance? Over. I answered the way I knew how. No emotion. No argument. Just observations. Anomalous road surface at crossing. Disturbed earth near culvert. Possible command wire or pressure device. Civilian traffic approaching. Recommend hold. Over. There was a pause. Then pushback. Negative on assessment. No confirmed threat. Route must stay open, push, and clear. Over. I did not respond immediately. I watched the pickup truck instead. It was close enough now that I could see the driver clearly. Older man. Baseball cap. One hand on the wheel, the other resting in the open window. He was not slowing. Why would he? This was his road. Time stretched thin. Every second we held felt like borrowed money, and I knew it. I could feel the cost building, not just for me, but for everyone watching the clock higher up the chain. Another voice joined the net. Different cadence, fewer words. 2-6, this is Task Force Actual. Say again your assessment. Over. I repeated it, slower this time, walking them through what I was seeing as if they were standing beside me. The darker asphalt. The way the dust lay wrong. The culvert dirt that looked camped down by hand. The metal sounds earlier. The approaching civilian vehicle that would cross the point whether we liked it or not. No one interrupted. The pickup was less than 200 meters out now. I made another decision. I signaled one soldier to peel back, staying low, using the ditch for cover. His job was to intercept the vehicle short of the crossing. Risky, but less risky than letting that truck roll over the patch of road. He moved without hesitation, disappeared into the terrain like we had trained. The radio crackled again. Stand by. All stations hold. Over. That single sentence changed everything. Moments later, the soldier intercepted the truck, waving the driver down, using his body language instead of shouting. The pickup slowed, then stopped well short of the crossing. The driver looked confused, irritated, but alive. Then a new report cut in from another element operating on the far side of the road. Possible disturbed soil at culvert. Fresh dig. Recommend EOD. Over. The tone on the net shifted instantly. Questions replaced directives. Someone asked for photos. Someone else called for engineers. Movement stopped everywhere. Explosive ordnance disposal was redirected from another sector. Engineers followed. Suddenly, nobody was in a hurry to push the crossing anymore. We held our positions while the specialists worked their way in, slow and deliberate, probes and mirrors instead of rifles. From where I was kneeling, I could see enough to know it was bad, not crude, not rushed. The device was buried deep, wired clean, designed to detonate under weight. When confirmation came over the radio, no one reacted outwardly. Confirmed IED. Significant yield. Pressure initiated. Stand fast. Over. I closed my eyes for half a second longer than necessary. If we had advanced when ordered, my team would have been standing directly on top of it. The lead element. The blast radius would have done the rest. No one said that out loud. They did not need to. The pickup driver was turned around and sent back the way he came, still unaware of how close he had come to dying on his normal morning drive. The road stayed empty after that. Command came back on the net, quieter now. 2-6, hold security. Good copy. Over. That was it. No apology. No praise. Just acknowledgement. I stayed kneeling in the dust, watching the crossing, feeling the delayed weight of what had almost happened settle into my legs and spine. The decision was no longer theoretical. It was real, measured in meters and seconds. And for the first time since we arrived, the pressure eased. Not because the danger was gone, but because we had named it before it named us. The engineers took their time. That was the first sign that this was worse than anyone wanted to admit. They moved in slow arcs, probing the ground with deliberate patience, mirrors angled into the culvert, hands steady despite the heat. EOD followed, quieter still, their movements economical, practiced. Nobody rushed them. Nobody asked how long it would take. When specialists slow down, it means they are counting things that cannot be rushed. We stayed in position while they worked. Knees in the dust, rifles up, eyes moving in slow patterns. The pickup truck was long gone, turned around and sent back the way it came, the driver still shaking his head in confusion. He never asked what was wrong with the road. He did not need to know. He drove away alive, and that was enough. The confirmation came without drama. Confirmed device. Pressure initiated. Secondary fragmentation present. Significant yield. Over. The words were flat, professional. They landed heavier than shouting ever could. Significant yield meant there would have been nothing clean about it. No narrow blast, no lucky angles. Just force and metal going everywhere it could reach. They pushed us back farther, expanding the cordon. I felt the distance in my bones as we shifted, every step backward loosening something tight in my chest. When we finally stopped, I could see the crossing clearly. The darker patch of asphalt, the culvert mouth half hidden by grass. The ordinary shape of a road that had been waiting. The countdown came next. Not announced, just understood. EOD does not dramatize detonations. They prepare, they confirm, and then they end the problem. At 1400 hours, the charge went. The blast did not crack like gunfire. It hit like weight, a deep, concussive force that rolled through the ground and climbed my legs before I could brace. My knees locked instinctively. The air pressed against my chest hard enough to steal breath, and the sound arrived a half-second later, low and heavy, rattling my teeth. Dust erupted straight up from the crossing, a column rising and then spreading outward, settling slowly over the fields. Small pieces of asphalt clattered back down, ticking against metal and dirt. The echo rolled away and came back weaker, like the land answering itself. Nobody cheered. Nobody spoke. When the dust thinned, the road was gone. Where the crossing had been was a crater, jagged and deep, the culvert torn open like it had been peeled apart by hand. Broken asphalt lay scattered around it, edges sharp and raw. Twisted metal sat exposed at the center, blackened and bent, exactly where my lead position would have been. I stayed looking at it longer than I meant to. The image fixed itself in my head without asking permission. Command came back on the radio a few minutes later. The tone was different now. Still controlled, still procedural, but quieter, measured. 2-6, walk us through your actions, step by step. Over. I keyed the mic and did exactly that. I started with arrival. The road surface. The culvert. The dust. The silence. I explained why each detail alone meant nothing, and why together they meant everything. I kept my voice even. I did not sell it. I did not defend it. I just told it the way it had happened. No one interrupted. When I finished, the net stayed silent for several seconds. Not dead air, listening air. The kind that lets you know your words landed where they needed to. Solid copy, 2-6. Maintain security, over. That was all. Nobody apologized. Nobody needed to. This was not about blame or credit. The system had pressed forward. Someone on the ground had said, stop. The outcome spoke for itself. We held position while engineers cleared the remaining debris and checked for secondary devices. The sun slid lower, the light changing the color of the dust in the air. My body started to register what it had been holding back. Fatigue crept in, slow and deep, settling into muscles that had been tight for hours. I watched my team during that time. Quiet, focused, professional. They did not look at the crater much. Soldiers learn early not to stare at things that could have been them. As the area was declared safe, traffic control elements moved in to reroute vehicles. Life began to flow around the absence where the road used to be. The mission shifted, as missions always do, and attention moved on to the next task. But for me, that moment stayed suspended. The blast was not the end of the crisis. It was the proof of it. The real decision had already been made earlier, in the silence, when nothing was happening, and the pressure to move was at its strongest. I did not write about that part in the report. I wrote the grid coordinates, the time, the confirmation of detonation. But even as the radio settled back into routine traffic, I could still feel the aftershock in my knees, a dull reminder of what had been waiting under that road. And I knew that silence, the one before the blast, was the sound that would stay with me the longest. Later that evening, after the engineers finished and the area was officially handed over, I finally stood up and felt it hit me all at once. My legs shook hard enough that I had to plant my feet wider to stay upright. I had been running on pressure and momentum all day, and now that it was gone, there was nothing holding my body together but habit. One of my soldiers stepped in without a word and pressed a bottle of water into my hand. I drank it slowly, feeling the coolness settle where the heat had been. We all understood how close it had been. No one needed to say it. You could see it in the way eyes lingered on the crater a second longer than necessary, then looked away. In the way voices stayed low even after the radios went quiet. Everyone was replaying the same scene in their head, measuring distance and timing, picturing where they would have been standing. The realization did not arrive with drama. There was no rush of relief, no sudden laughter. It came like weight, settling in my chest and staying there, heavy, solid, the kind of weight you do not shake off, only learn to carry. I felt it while we packed up, while weapons were cleared and slung, while the routine of movement took over again. Everything looked normal, and that somehow made it harder to accept how close we had come to losing that normal. I thought about the moment I said I was holding, about how calm my voice had sounded in my own ears, and how much effort it had taken to keep it that way. I thought about the line I had crossed without fully realizing it at the time. Refusing an order is not something you rehearse. You do not train for it. You either do it or you do not, and you live with what follows. If I had been wrong, I would have owned it. That is part of the job. I would have written the statements, stood in front of commanders, accepted whatever consequences came with that decision. Leadership does not stop when things go badly. In some ways, that is when it matters most. But I had been right. And that carried its own burden. Being right meant understanding how thin the margin had been. It meant knowing that procedure, followed perfectly, would have put us in the ground, that my judgment, imperfect and human, had outweighed doctrine in that moment. That is not a comfortable truth. Doctrine exists because individual judgment fails as often as it succeeds. Trusting yourself over the system is not something you do lightly, and it is not something you celebrate afterward. That night, back on the base, the air felt different. Not lighter, just subdued. Conversation stayed short. No one lingered over meals. I sat outside for a while, watching the sky darken beyond the wire. The sounds of the day faded, replaced by the low hum of generators and distant movement. Ordinary noises that felt newly fragile. A couple of my soldiers sat nearby, not close enough to crowd, not far enough to be alone. No one asked questions. No one offered congratulations. They did not need to. Their presence said what words could not. They trusted that the decision had been made for the right reasons, and they trusted that I would do the same again if it came to it. When I finally lay down, sleep did not come right away. My body was exhausted, but my mind stayed fixed on that crossing, the darker asphalt, the culvert, the crater that was there now instead of a road. I thought about how easily the day could have gone the other way, how simple it would have been to step forward and let momentum decide. I understood then that being right does not bring closure. It brings awareness. It sharpens you. It leaves a mark that is quiet but permanent. That day did not make me more confident. It made me more careful. And that, more than anything else, was the weight I carried forward. The days that followed settled into a rhythm that looked familiar on the surface but felt different underneath. Patrol schedules stayed the same. Briefings still happened at the same time each morning. Routes were assigned, checked, and driven again. From the outside, nothing about the mission had changed, but the way it moved did. I noticed it first in how command spoke to me on the radio. The transmissions were still short, still procedural, but there were more pauses now. More questions before decisions instead of after them. Instead of being told to execute immediately, I was asked what I was seeing on the ground. What felt normal, what did not. It was subtle, but it mattered. Someone up the chain had replayed that day enough times to understand that momentum without context is not strength. There were fewer assumptions, fewer sentences that ended with over and no space for response. It did not feel like distrust before, but afterward it felt like respect. Not personal respect, professional respect. The kind that acknowledges that no map, no screen, no report can replace someone kneeling in the dust looking at a problem with their own eyes. My team changed too, though not in any loud or obvious way. They had trusted me before. That comes with time, shared risk, and consistency. But after that day, something deeper settled in. Orders were followed instantly, without the brief hesitation that comes from second-guessing intent. When I raised a hand, movement stopped. When I pointed, rifles tracked without question. That kind of trust does not show up in after-action reports. It shows up in milliseconds, shaved-off reactions, and in silence when silence matters. Nobody talked about the crossing unless they had to. We did not dissect it. We did not joke about it. Soldiers have a way of moving past things that almost happen by focusing on what is in front of them. Dwelling can get in the way of the next decision. Still, I caught glances sometimes toward roads that looked just a little too ordinary, toward culverts that disappeared into shadow. Everyone remembered, even if no one said it out loud. I thought about that road more than I expected. Sometimes while moving through other villages. Sometimes while standing watch late at night. I would picture the darker patch of asphalt, the way it stood out only if you were already looking for the wrong thing. I would think about how nothing had happened there because we waited, because we slowed down when everything around us was pushing to keep moving. Nothing happened. That phrase carries a lot of weight in this line of work. It sounds like failure to people who have never been responsible for preventing disaster. To them, success looks like action, like motion, like something visible at the end of the day. But sometimes success is measured by absence, no explosion, no evacuation, no name spoken over a radio that suddenly goes quiet. That kind of outcome does not make headlines. It does not fit cleanly into stories people like to tell. There is no single moment you can freeze and point to. No dramatic image of bravery. The most important decision was to stay still, and staying still rarely looks impressive from the outside, but it keeps people alive. As the weeks went on, new concerns took over. Different routes, different villages, different threats. That is how it always works. The mission keeps moving, whether you are ready or not. Still, that day stayed with me, not as a highlight, but as a reference point, a reminder of how thin the margin can be between routine and catastrophe. It showed up later in smaller moments, when something felt off but could not yet be explained, when pressure built to meet a timeline that no longer matched the ground truth. Each time, I remembered that road and the crater that replaced it. I remembered how restraint, in that case, had been the right call. I never went back to that crossing. There was no reason to. It was repaired eventually, smoothed over, turned back into just another stretch of road that people drove without thinking. That felt appropriate. Some places do not need markers. Their significance lives in what did not happen there. Leadership, I learned, is not always about pushing forward. Sometimes it is about knowing when to slow the system down long enough for reality to catch up. That lesson does not come with ceremony. It comes quietly, through days that end normally because someone chose caution when caution felt uncomfortable. The mission continued. We did our jobs. We went where we were sent. But something had changed, even if no one named it. We were more deliberate, more attentive to the small details that do not show up in briefings, more willing to ask why before asking how fast. That road stayed with me not because of the explosion that eventually tore it apart, but because of the silence that came before it. The pause that made space for a decision that kept us out of the ground. Nothing happened there, and that was the point. I never received anything for that day. No award. No citation. I did not expect one, and I would have been uncomfortable if I had. The report was short and impersonal. Grid coordinates. Time on target. Confirmation of detonation. It went into a system that does not remember fear or doubt, only outcomes. What stayed with me was the moment before it all resolved. The second where everything depended on a decision made in silence. Refusing to move felt heavier than any firefight I had ever been in because there was no enemy in sight. Just pressure. Just procedure. Just the knowledge that if I was wrong, I would own it alone. Leadership is not about being fearless. It is about carrying fear without letting it leak into your voice or your hands. It is about standing still when momentum is telling you to go and trusting your judgment enough to live with the consequences. I think about the soldiers who were behind me that day more than I think about the crater, their spacing, their discipline, the way they waited without asking why. We came closer to a different ending than any of them will ever know, and that is exactly how it should be. The best protection leaves no memory for the people it protects. Most people will never know that road existed. They will never know what was buried under it, or how close it came to ending lives in an instant. The crossing was rebuilt. Traffic flows over it now. To anyone passing through, it is just another stretch of pavement in a place they will never think about again. At 1400 hours, the engineers detonated the charge. The blast traveled through the ground and into my knees, a dull, heavy reminder of what had been waiting there. When the dust settled, the road was gone, replaced by a crater exactly where my lead position would have been. I did not write about my thoughts in the report. I did not write about the silence before the blast. I just wrote the coordinates and signed my name. But sometimes, when everything is quiet, I can still feel that shockwave move through the earth. And I think about the pause that came before it. The moment where waiting mattered more than moving. Subscribe to my channel, Lady Veteran Stories, for more real military stories, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from.